it is a fascinating time to be here. So I'm speaking from Colorado, just north of Denver, and these executive orders are tricky because, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. This is a challenge. How much they can stick is up for debate, but what is actually within the president's legal authority? The main one, which has gotten attention among the Irish nationalist types, is that he is trying to do away with birthright citizenship, which is a huge problem here because we have a population of about 25 million, no one really knows, but about that, of illegal immigrants. And naturally, they have children, and all the children are citizens just by birthright. And that creates a much more complicated situation of trying to deport the parents, right? So that they create what are called anchor babies. Now, there are many other good executive orders that have come out. So perhaps the most of interest to a libertarian leaning audience would be, is it Ross Ulbricht? I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but the man who created an anonymous trading platform or marketplace was imprisoned about a decade ago. And
Silk Road.
Donald Trump gave him a full pardon. And that was a request specifically from the Libertarian Party. Donald
Hmm.
Trump took the unprecedented move of going to the Libertarian Party National Convention seeking to build a bridge. And the Libertarian Party nominated a strongly left libertarian candidate, which basically just sent a whole bunch of libertarians right to Donald Trump. So, so the that I suspect that outreach really did help Trump. It did move the let's say 0.5% of the vote, which may not seem like a lot, but it really is a substantial amount if you're competing over these very fine margins.
Of course.
Yeah.
Um, did you know Fergus? I knew about him. He was the developer of Silk Road, which was like the dark web
Yes.
way means for trading, um, and I suppose in many ways he was ahead of his time with that. When we look at the development and growing importance of cryptocurrencies and things, but what
Yes.
were did you know much about the ins and outs of the case?
I have I have heard. Look, it's been a few years since this has been a case that at the time I thought was an outrage, right? And apparently he had enormous wealth in Bitcoin, which has been stolen from and will never be returned. So many of the people leading the case against him had an incentive to basically get control of his assets. But he was never actually charged with a crime of his own, in that he was just supposedly a facilitator, right? Because he created an outlet for other people to buy drugs or engage in prostitution or whatever it may be. So that's why the Libertarian Party got behind his case so seriously, that there were inferences that he had engaged in such acts, but he was not found guilty in terms of actually selling it himself. But I guess they were seeing him as like akin to a trafficker or to a facilitator, rather than actually being a salesman, and that was enough. And the judge at the time, uh, I'm getting a little bit weak on the details here, but had said that they wanted to make an example of him, to really throw the book at him, and so that other people would not attempt to do this, let's say, gray market or informal marketplace away from all regulation, all taxation, everything, which of course is, we call it agorism over here. It's basically a parallel market, which is in some ways the freest market around.
Mm.
Now, but maybe we should, getting back to the executive orders from Trump, it just seems to be that he learned a heck of a lot from his first tenure, and he just
Yeah.
decided, I'll just throw everything all at once. and and not to bother with any kind of discussion or compromise, just put everything out there as aggressively as possible, and then make everyone who opposes him work as quickly as possible to try to reverse these things. So how much of it will stick, I don't know, but he's being much more aggressive or assertive and less apologetic. And because he realizes, I think, that all those around him are snakes. And no, I shouldn't it's a broad statement, but he realizes that he's in a very difficult scenario, and wasting his time with dialogue or discussion is not going to help, and he should just get right to the task. And we mentioned a week or two back about the situation he is in, and I looked this up after the stream. It is a fact that he got 6% of the Washington D.C. vote, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris got more than 90%. That
Yeah.
just gives you a sense for the hostility where he's based now.
I saw that. So you were talking about his personnel changes. That's what I would have identified as his biggest weakness in his first term was personnel choices.
Sure.
I think he made a few moves in that direction to kind of let people know, hey, I'm on top of it this time. I think stripping John Bolton of his clearances, security clearances, and things was a strong statement and a good statement. I think he typified that kind of careerist neocon kind of rot that was there. That I think actually his problem was in his first term that he was too eager to build bridges, because
Exactly. Yeah.
even though he's portrayed as this this maverick, this crazy guy, he's not at all. And even if you look at the composition of his cabinet this time around, there's a lot of Democrats or former Democrats in there, everyone from Tulsi Gabbard to his big tech new friends and whatnot.
RFK, yeah.
So I do think that he's quite good at bringing people. I think what he's trying to learn this time around, or hopefully he will learn, is that you can bring people to your side, bring them to heel if you have to. But you have to. That I think it's that he wants to meet people in the middle, but he realized that he have to do it through a position of strength, unfortunately, because of the nature of
Exactly. Yeah. That
politics.
the deep state or permanent bureaucracy are so disruptive, so inclined to sabotage that you just have to fight them. Basically, that they're
Yeah.
not going to come to the table. And there's been some wonderful investigative journalism, or you might call it guerrilla journalism, from James O'Keefe, where he basically manages to get all these officials to go on dates with cute women, and these women have cameras, and these guys just spill the beans as to what they're doing. It's amazing. and it's just ridiculous, because they'll just say, oh yeah, we're just going to retitle these programs so Trump doesn't know what's going on, or we're already having meetings as to how to disrupt Trump's plans, and it's all going out viral on X and YouTube, I think, as well. It's a bit like during the
this is an important point. This is something that I've been banging on about here for a very long time, is that, as people are, right now, since Trump came in, a lot of people are loudly proclaiming woke is dead. But of course it isn't, unless you root out all of the people who are pushing it at university level, especially in civil service and whatnot, because, all that will happen is it'll hibernate and reemerge as something else in a couple of years if you don't root out the people who are behind it. And so that was interesting to see today how a couple of universities were going viral, and I think government departments are changing their DEI titles to community affairs
engagement.
yeah.
Engagement officers.
But of course, but it's a very real threat. So I was very happy to see that people were on top of that. It's essential. I think. Oh gosh, what's his name
Yeah,
now?
I don't know how this is where the DEI industry is deeper here, if you can believe it, than in Ireland, because
Oh yeah.
it really has been part of major institutions for more than 50 years.
Yeah.
And so that's why just the one signature is not going to turn that around. It's so deeply embedded in all sorts of processes. Where I went to university, they would have had maybe half a dozen employees or more just working on this full time. And so I don't, and many of these organizations are private as well. So it'd be difficult to get in there and tell them, no, you cannot have this. And I don't really want to do that. So in many ways, this is more just it's symbolic. It's telling the world that there is popular, let's say, rejection or popular disapproval of these programs, and major organizations are learning that now. And so there was a story I just saw this morning about Costco, which is a prominent grocery provider here in the United States, how they are in a battle basically with their customers and shareholders over whether to have DEI programs still in the organization. And this is going on in many different major organizations right now. They're debating whether to keep DEI or to let it go.
Um, a very controversial, I don't think so, but a controversial one, or one that actually I'm surprised that it hasn't caused much more controversy, was his executive order giving exonerating up nearly 1,600 J6
Yes. Yeah.
convictions. Now, I think that's interesting. That's obviously going to always cause controversy depending on what side of the aisle you're on, but it shows that the guy means business.
Mm. Yeah,
And
he expended some political capital to do that.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you know Ron Coleman? I don't know if you follow him. He's a lawyer there in the US. He does a lot with free speech and people on the conservative side of things who've maybe had their careers damaged through smears and whatnot. He worked with Harmeet K. Dillon's law firm there, and she's now with the administration. But it's very interesting that obviously in some cases there was violence used or whatnot, but in some cases it's quite shocking to see the length of terms that were handed down for people who were essentially in the building. Some of them were in the building maybe 4 to 8 minutes, literally walking through, and were handed down 19-month sentences and things like this.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a complicated one, but I think that has become so politicized. You are going to, as you say, expend a lot of political capital simply to address it. But I think it's, again, he's not meeting people halfway anymore. I think he realized that you get nothing for that. It's seen as weakness.
Some people who were imprisoned were not did never actually entered the Capitol. They were just quote unquote organizers.
Mm,
And there is quite a strong sentiment in the United States that this was a setup.
yeah,
And I mean, there's a lot you could say about it, and you could go down rabbit holes. But there are two prominent individuals. The main man holding the door open has never been identified and never been charged, and is on no wanted list. And then there's the other gentleman who was the first one to pull one of the windows open. He too has never been identified, nor has he been prosecuted. And the strong sense or strong belief is that these are FBI agents. And it's unfortunate that there's such suspicion against federal officials, but that's the way it is. And I followed the journalist who was there and took videotape of both those two men, and it's a really an ugly side of the federal bureaucracy. Uh, there's also been more information come out that at least 26 FBI informants have been admitted to were in that crowd. So how
right.
many what the real number was, I don't know, but it's just many people see this as a setup, and that these gentlemen mainly were political prisoners.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. So one of the cases that I was looking at for one of these guys who got a 19 months custodial sentence,
Yes.
who was in there for 8 minutes. He
Mm.
walked through the foyer. He committed no violent act, but importantly, when they went to prosecute him, the prosecution submitted a video, and this was apparently common in many of these nonviolent minor infractions, that they put together a very dramatic collection of the worst things that happened that day, the worst violence that
Mm.
took place, and they
Yep.
played this as an introduction at the trial. And again, it was to sway the jury, which was, again, as you pointed out, heavily, heavily, heavily Democrat anyway.
Yeah.
To well, the region is, at least, that
Yes.
to arouse emotions such that these guys were going to be found guilty, railroaded, no matter what. And that because a lot of these guys, they're not a lot of them weren't able to afford high power lawyers or whatnot. A lot of these
Sure,
guys didn't have
sure.
lawyers who were able to say, "Wait a minute, you can't put that into submit that." And those who had decent and competent lawyers were able to get it thrown out. Those who didn't ended up doing 19 months based on this kind of chicanery.
It shows, or it underlines the importance of alternative media, because you just live in different worlds. When some people think this was some kind of insurrection to overthrow the government. None of these people were even armed, so
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. And they were not egged on by Trump. He actually called them to be peaceful and to go home. And then Twitter at the time banned his account.
Right.
So it is frustrating because leftist or progressive media, I call them regime media, continue to parrot this insurrection line, which is very misleading, and it demonizes these people. And it speaks to Trump actually having somewhat of a human side, that I think he, in his heart of hearts, actually sympathizes with these individuals, that he
Mm-hmm.
knows they were his supporters and they've been treated unjustly, and he cares about that. Like I said, he didn't have to do that. He has expended a lot of political capital to do that,
Mm.
and yeah, but I think he actually just personally cared about that issue.
I think it was. I do think it was gutsy, and what surprised me is the lack of pushback on it. To be honest with you, because that was for a number of years afterwards. Everything was J6, J6, insurrection, and you would have expected there to be similar pushback. But I take the relatively calm after the executive orders from the media to be a tacit admission that it was just propagandized at the time and it was
Yeah,
overhyped for political purposes. And I'm sorry, Fergus, Aidan, if you don't mind there, would you maybe behind the scene there try and get Ray set up with a mic? It'd be
yeah.
great.
I want to get back to some work. To be frank, I mean, I'd love to chat, and I was hoping to hear Gerard today, but
Yeah, of course.
people recognize that it was a weaponized event, right? So it's a bit like, I don't know if people have followed this, but in the US military, there were all sorts of COVID vaccination or jab mandates. And it was really, it became basically a purging method, because for whatever reason, it was just clear that the people who did not want to take the COVID vaccines were almost 100% Republicans. So if you impose this mandate and kick out anyone who doesn't want to take it, you're basically cleansing the military of more
Mm.
conservative people. Yeah.
That's right. They got reinstated. That'll be interesting to see because there's a number of questions, knock-on of questions too. There, for example, will they get back pay? Will it affect their pensions?
Mm,
Then, and that's the same for the people who were arrested for J6. A lot of them actually had military backgrounds. They had veteran pensions and various health insurances and whatnot. And so it'll be interesting to see will they, because we're talking about people's lives being completely ruined here. They have lost.
absolutely. And it's caused, the US military is one of the last, let's say, federal institutions that most Americans respect.
Yes, yeah,
And
true.
because they see that as more independent, more proud of American tradition. But now they feel like, gosh, I mean, maybe Trump can turn that around, but in general, there's much less sympathy or optimism for the US military among just regular Americans.
Mm. Fergus, you've been very kind to jump into the breach there, so I'll let you go. You're a busy man.
Okay,
Fergus,
guys. Yeah.
Fergus, just circling back on, as Jen Psaki would say, circling back on Ross Ulbricht, right?
Yes.
And yes, the story is very sketchy. I think one of the connections there that may be of interest to people from a libertarian perspective is, I believe that was a promise to the Libertarian Party, if I'm incorrect in saying, and it certainly was part of the discussion anyway. Of course, there were other promises made as well, that there may be somebody joining them. That promise didn't actually come through, if I'm correct in saying. However, in relation to the pardon of Ross Ulbricht, who had actually received 2 life sentences without chance of parole, when he was actually the founder of the Silk Road, let's say the dark web, where everything
Yeah.
from narcotics to everything else was being sold. they never actually, even though they claimed he hired a hitman and stuff like that, they never brought that into the criminal case. And basically there was an outrage. He had no prior convictions or anything like that, and there was quite an outrage because of the sentence that he got, which was basically 2 life sentences. Obviously, it's quite a harsh one,
Yeah,
where there was no criminal proof or anything. So I think that was a libertarian win.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
if I'm right in saying as well, as Trump pardoned, or was talking about the pardon on camera, he actually couldn't help but get in the point that the people involved in his conviction, many of the people involved in his conviction, were some of the very same people, and I quote Donald J. Trump,
yeah,
that were on a witch hunt for him. So
exactly.
yeah, so that was
Yeah,
the
and Trump has a personal feeling for this because his own home in Florida was invaded by all these agents. So he has about as much contempt for them as everybody else.
Yeah.
absolutely. I've tried
This,
to pass Ray down a
yep,
microphone, guys. I've tried to pass
he's
Ray
he's
the mic.
he's still a listener. Yeah, but this story is relevant for the Irish Freedom Party. Now, I'm not sure if we're discussing that today, but because there has been a fracture in the Libertarian Party in the United States. It's like I said, along the left-right lines, and the right or conservative libertarians are super happy about this whole situation about Trump coming and speaking about him making an agreement with them. And but however, when Trump went to speak, and he didn't have to, I mean, it was an odd instance of him going to speak to the Libertarian Party commission. I mean, he's not the Libertarian Party candidate, and he would be openly competing against them. They were booing him, which I thought was extremely low class. That if you
Mm.
invite a speaker and then go and boo him, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
The Libertarian Party in the US is just, I find them fascinating because libertarians vote Republican because they're often so embarrassed by the actually official Libertarian
Libertarian
Party.
Party.
There's such a disconnect between the Libertarian Party and actual Libertarian voters. It's fascinating, really.
Yeah, well, this is where Gerard would be speaking about this. Many people conflate libertarianism, which is a political philosophy, with a philosophy for their own personal ethics, and these are two different things, right?
Mm.
And so I've long felt like I didn't belong in the libertarian circles because I was more of a social conservative. But really, the libertarian ideology doesn't take a position on your own personal behavior in terms of whether you want to be religious or not. But it just so happens that the Libertarian Party does have more left libertarian or social progressive people in it. And it means that the conservative types tend to not be as comfortable with that.